Okay, so this is the daf for Shabbat. So this is daf 46. We're in Sanhedrin. What is this? This is Parak Vav, so chapter 6. Again, this is daf 46, so page 46. Amud Aleph. And we were in the last daf. We were discussing the different procedures for capital punishment, and then the sages ended on the note of discussing the rules of scriptural exegesis. So it says, now that the generalization and the detail are distant from each other, that is, that they are written in different verses, the verses serve to include one who was found guilty of idol worship, as he is similar to the blasphemer in all matters. He too is subject to be hung after he is executed. Rabbi Eliezer, by contrast, interprets the verses based on the principle of amplifications and restrictions. And the phrase, and he is put to death, and you shall hang him, is an amplification. The phrase, for he that is hung is a curse of God, is a restriction. Were the amplification and the restriction right next to each other, we would apply the principle of amplifications and restrictions and include only one who is guilty of idol worship, as he is similar to a blasphemer in all ways. Now that they are distant from each other, the verses serve to include all those who are liable to be stoned to death. All their corpses are hung after they are put to death. The Mishnah teaches that according to the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, the corpse of a man is hung facing the people, while the corpse of a woman is hung facing the tree. Whereas the rabbis say that the corpse of a woman is not hung at all. The Gemara asks, what is the reasoning behind the opinion of the rabbis? The Gemara answers, as the verse states, and if a man has committed a sin worthy of death, he is put to death, and you shall hang him on a tree. Deuteronomy 21:22, which teaches that you shall hang him on a tree after his death, but you shall not hang her on a tree after her death. And Rabbi Eliezer would respond that the inference to be drawn from this verse is that after his death they hang him by himself without his clothing. So the Gemara asks, and from where do the rabbis derive that the corpse of the executed man is hung without his clothing? The Gemara answers, yes, it is indeed so that they agree. Yes, it is indeed so that they agree that the word him teaches that the corpse is hung without clothing. But the source of their ruling is the verse that states, and if a man has committed a sin, so which indicates that a man is hung after he is put to death, but a woman is not hung after she is put to death. The Gemara asks, and as for Rabbi Eliezer, what does he learn from this clause of the verse? And if a man has committed a sin. Reish Lakish says, that clause of the verse serves to exclude a stubborn and rebellious son who, according to the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, is not hung after he is executed, because he is not a man. The Gemara raises a difficulty, but isn't it taught explicitly in a Baraita, a stubborn and rebellious son is first stoned and afterward his corpse is hung? This is the statement of Rabbi Eliezer. Rather, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says that part of the verse comes to include a stubborn and rebellious son, that his corpse is also hung. What is the reason for this? The Gemara explains, as the verse states, and if a man has committed a sin, indicating that only the corpse of the man is hung, but not that of a child, thereby excluding a stubborn and rebellious son. And the word sin indicates that only the corpse of one who is put to death on account of a sin is hung, to the exclusion of a stubborn and rebellious son who is executed not because of the sin that he has already committed, but on account of what he is likely to do in the future. This is an example of a restrictive expression following a restrictive expression, as both expressions indicate that a stubborn and rebellious son is not hung after he is put to death. And there is a hermeneutical principle that a restrictive expression following a restrictive expression serves only to amplify the halacha and include additional cases. In this case, it serves to teach that the corpse of a stubborn and rebellious son is hung after he is put to death. The Mishnah teaches that Rabbi Eliezer said to the rabbis, did Shimon ben Shattach not hang in Ashkelon women who were found guilty of witchcraft? And the rabbis replied that no proof can be brought from there, since he hanged 80 women on a single day, which clearly indicates that this was an extraordinary measure and therefore cannot serve as a precedent for normative halacha. Rav Chisda says they taught that one court may not judge two capital cases on one day, only when two cases involve two different modes of execution. But when they involve only one mode of execution, the court may, in fact, judge them on the same day. The Gemara raises a difficulty, but the incident relating to Shimon ben Shittach involved only one mode of execution, as all the women were accused of witchcraft, and yet the rabbi said to him that the court may not judge them on one day. Rather, if a ruling was stated citing Rav Chisda, this is what was stated. They taught that one court may not judge two capital cases on one day, only when the two cases involving one mode of execution are similar to two cases involving two different modes of execution. And what are the circumstances of such a situation? For example, when there are two different transgressions that are punishable by the same mode of execution, the court may not judge two such cases in one day. But where there is only one mode of execution and only one transgression, the court may in fact judge two cases on one day. Rav Ada bar Ahava raises an objection from a Baraita that states, the same court may not judge two people charged with capital transgressions on one day, not even an adulterer and an adulteress. This indicates that a court may not judge two cases on one day, even if the two cases involve only one mode of execution and the same transgression. Rav Chisda interpreted the Baraita as referring to a case of idolatry involving the daughter of a priest and the man with whom she engaged in intercourse, as the daughter of a priest is liable to receive death by burning, while the man is liable to receive death by stoning if the woman was betrothed to another man, or strangulation if she was married to another man. So it says, or the Baraita is referring to a case of adultery involving the daughter of a priest, and those who rendered as conspiring witnesses, the witnesses who rendered as conspiring witnesses, the witnesses who testified about her. It is taught in Baraita. Rabbi Eliezer Ben Yaakov says, I heard that the court may administer lashes and capital punishment even when not required by Torah law, and they may not administer these punishments with the intention of violating the statement of the Torah. That is, to disregard the punishment stated in the Torah and administer another punishment. Rather, they must administer these punishments to erect a fence around the Torah so that people will fear sinning. And an incident occurred involving one who rode a horse on Shabbat during the days of the Greeks. And they brought him to a court and stoned him because, not because he deserved that punishment, as riding a horse on Shabbat is forbidden only by rabbinic decree, but because the hour required it, as people had become lax in their observance of Shabbat, and therefore it became necessary to impose the severe punishment for a relatively minor offense. Another incident occurred involving a man who engaged in intercourse with his wife in public under a fig tree, and they brought him to a court and flogged him, not because that punishment was fitting for him, as such conduct is not forbidden by the Torah, but because the hour required it. So people had become remiss in matters of modesty, therefore stringent measures had to be taken to rectify the situation. Okay, the Mishnah states, so we go back to the Mishnah. How do they hang the corpse on one, how do they hang the corpse of one who was put to death by stoning? They sink a post into the earth with a piece of wood jutting out, forming a T-shaped structure, and the court appointee then places the dead man's two hands, one upon the other, ties them, and hangs him with his hands. So kind of like that. They would tie him with his hands crossed like that. Okay, Rabbi Yoshi says the post is not sunk into the ground, rather it leans against the wall, and he hangs the corpse on it the way that butchers do with meat. The dead man hangs there for only a short time, and then they immediately untie him. And if he was left hanging overnight, a prohibition is transgressed. As it's stated, his body shall not remain all night upon the tree, but you shall bury him that day, for he that is hung is a curse of God. Deuteronomy 21:23. That is to say, were the corpse left hanging on the tree overnight, people would ask, for what reason was this one hung after he was put to death? And they would be answered, because he blessed God, which is a euphemism for blasphemy. Because we don't say, about cursing God, right? So, and therefore the name of heaven would be desecrated were the dead man's corpse to remain hanging, reminding everybody of his transgression. Rabbi Meir said, the phrase, for he that is hung is a curse, Kililat of God, should be understood as follows. When a man suffers in the wake of his sin, what expression does the divine presence use? I am distressed, kalani, about my head. I am distressed about my arm, meaning I too suffer when the wicked are punished. From here it is derived, if God suffers such stress over the blood of the wicked that is spilled, even though they justly deserve their punishment, it can be inferred a fortiori that he suffers distress over the blood of the righteous. Okay, and the sages said, not only this, that an executed transgressor must be buried on the same day that he is killed, but they said that anyone who leaves his deceased relative overnight without burying him transgresses a prohibition. But if he left the deceased overnight for the sake of the deceased honor, that is, to bring a coffin or shrouds for his burial, he does not transgress the prohibition against leaving him unburied overnight. After the executed transgressor is taken down, he is buried, and they would not bury him in his ancestral burial plot. Rather, 2 graveyards were established for the burial of those executed by the court. One for those who were killed by decapitation or strangled, and one for those who were stoned or burned. Once the flesh of the deceased had decomposed, they would gather his bones and bury them in their proper place in its ancestral plot, and soon after the execution, the relatives of the executed transgressor would come and inquire about the welfare of the judges and about the welfare of the witnesses, as if to say, "We hold no grudges against you, as you judged a true judgment." And the relatives of the executed man would not mourn for him with the observance of the usual mourning rites, so that his unmourned death would atone for his transgression. But they would grieve over his passing, since grief is felt only in the heart. The Gemara now says, the sages taught in a Braita, where it stated, "And if a man has committed a sin worthy of death, you shall hang him on a tree," I would have said that first they hang him, and only afterward they put him to death, the way the Gentile government does, executing the transgressor by hanging. Therefore, the verse states, "And if a man has committed a sin worthy of death, and he is put to death, and you shall hang him on a tree," Deuteronomy 21:22, teaching that first they put him to death, and only afterward they hang him. How so? They delay the verdict until it is near sunset, and then they conclude his judgment, and they put him to death, and immediately afterward hang him. One ties him to a hanging post, another immediately unties him, in order to fulfill the mitzvah of hanging the corpse of the executed transgressor. The sages taught, Tanu Rabbanan, from the verse, "And you shall hang him on a tree," I would derive that the body may be hung either on a tree that has been attached from the ground or on one that is still attached to the ground. Therefore, the verse states, "His body shall not remain all night upon the tree, but you shall bury him, kavor, tik berenu, that day." Deuteronomy 21:23. Okay, based on the doubled verb, it is derived that not only must the transgressor's body be buried, but the tree on which it is hung must also be buried. As the verse employs the same term to instruct that both must be buried, the verse teaches that the corpse must be hung on a tree that has already been detached from the ground and is lacking only burial, just as the corpse is lacking only burial. This serves to exclude hanging a corpse on a tree that is still attached to the ground and is lacking both cutting down and burial. So Rabbi Yoshi says the tree upon which the corpse is hung is not sunk into the ground, rather it is leaned against a wall, as the verse teaches that the tree must be lacking only burial. This serves to exclude hanging a corpse on a tree that is lacking both detachment and burial. And the rabbi said detaching from the ground a tree that has already been cut down and was later sunk back into the ground is nothing. That is, it is an insignificant act. So he's the exception. He's saying that it's leaned against the wall, but they're arguing that. Okay, the Mishnah teaches, that is to say, were the dead man's corpse to remain hanging, reminding everyone of his transgression, people would ask, for what reason was this one hanging? Was this one hung? And they would be answered, because he blessed God, which is a euphemism for blasphemy, and the name of heaven would be desecrated. So it is taught in a Braita that Rabbi Meir says, the sages told a parable. To what is this matter comparable? It is comparable to 2 brothers who were twins and lived in the same city. One was appointed king, while the other went out to engage in banditry. The king commanded that his brother be punished, and they hanged his twin brother for his crimes. Anyone who saw the bandit hanging would say, the king was hanged. The king therefore commanded that his brother be taken down, and they took the bandit down. Similarly, people are created in God's image, therefore God is disgraced when a corpse is hung for a transgression that the person has committed. The Mishnah teaches that Rabbi Amir said that the phrase, for he that is hung is a curse, kelelat, of God, should be understood as follows. When a man suffers in the wake of his sin, the divine presence says, I am distressed, kalani, about my head, and I am distressed about my arm. It's interesting because it uses that phrase, because that's what, you have the tefillin shel rosh and tefillin shel yad. So I am distressed about my head, I am distressed about my arm. The Gemara asks, from where is this inferred? How does Rabbi Meir understand the word kilelot? Abaye says, when a man is hung after he is put to death, God is like one who said, I am not light, call late, meaning my head is heavy for me, my arm is heavy for me. God is in distress when he has to administer punishment. Rava said to him, if so, he should have said explicitly, my head is heavy for me, my arm is heavy for me. Rather, Rava said, when a man is hung after he is put to death, God is like one who said, the world is light for me. Kil li alma, meaning I am light and therefore the world is heavy for me. I am in distress. Okay, the Gemara asks, this word, kilelat, is needed for what it itself teaches, namely that a blasphemer is hung after he has been stoned. How then can it be interpreted as alluding to God's distress at the death of a transgressor? The Gemara answers, if so, the verse should have stated, one who curses, mekalel. What is the meaning of kilelat? It serves to teach the statement taught by Rabbi Meir. The Gemara asked, if so, say perhaps that the entire verse comes for this purpose, to underscore the dignity of the transgressor who was created in God's image, and not to teach the halacha governing a blasphemer. The Gemara responds, if so, the verse should have stated lightness, so kilat. What is the meaning of kililat? Conclude two conclusions from it. Conclude that the blasphemer is hung after he's been stoned, and conclude that God is distressed at the death of the transgressor. The Mishnah teaches that everyone, not only an executed transgressor, must be buried on the day of his death, if that is at all possible. Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, from where is it derived that one who leaves his deceased relative overnight without burying him transgresses a prohibition? The verse states, but you shall bury him. Kavor tik berenu, Deuteronomy 21:23, doubling the verb for emphasis. From here it is derived that one who leaves his deceased relative overnight without burying him transgresses a prohibition. There are those who say that Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, from where in the Torah is there a hint of the mitzvah of burial? The verse states, but you shall bury him, kavor tik berenu, doubling the verb for emphasis. From here there is a hint to the mitzvah of burial in the Torah. Okay, the Gemara relates, King Shapur, the monarch of Persia, once said to Rav Hama, from where in the Torah is there a hint to the mitzvah of burial? What proof is there that the dead must be buried and not treated in some other manner? Rav Hama was silent and said nothing to him, as he could not find a suitable source. Rav Achab Bar Yaakov said, the world has been handed over to the foolish, as Rav Hama should have said to King Shapur, that the mitzvah of burial is derived from the verse, but you shall bury him, Deuteronomy 21:23. The Gemara explains, in that case, King Shapur could have replied that the verse merely proves that a coffin should be made for the deceased so that he should be placed in it, not that the deceased should be buried in the ground, as the verse could be understood as instructing that the corpse be placed in some sort of receptacle, not in the ground. The Gemara challenges Rav Hama could still have claimed that the mitzvah of burial is derived from the doubled verb, you shall bury him, kavor tik berenu. The Gemara answers, in that case, King Shapur could have replied that he does not learn anything from a doubled verb, which seems to be merely a stylistic choice and not the source of a new halacha. The Gemara asks, but let Rav Hama say that the mitzvah to bury the dead is derived from the fact that the righteous forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, were all buried. The Gemara answers, King Shapur could have said that this was merely a custom of the time, but not a mitzvah. The Gemara asked, Rav Hama could have derived the mitzvah from the fact that the Holy One, blessed be He, buried Moshe, which proves that this is the proper way to handle the dead. The Gemara answers, King Shapur could still have said that God acted in this manner in order not to deviate from the general custom. But this does not prove that burying the dead is a mitzvah. I want to point out, in this particular Koran Talmud Bavli, they actually have a picture of a plate with the image of King Shapur II from the 4th century on it. So it was a legitimate king. So the Gemara suggests, come in here, a proof that the burying the dead is a mitzvah. As the prophet Ahiah, the Shilonite, said about Abiah, son of Jeroboam, and all Israel shall eulogize him and bury him. 1 Kings 14:13. The Gemara answers, from here too there is a proof, as they may have buried Abiyah in order not to deviate from the general custom of the world, and not because they were required to do so. So the Gemara proposes another proof. Jeremiah proclaimed a curse upon the wicked, saying, "They shall not be eulogized, nor shall they be buried, but they shall be as dung upon the face of the earth." Jeremiah 16:4. Which proves that when no curse has been pronounced, the dead should be buried. The Gemara rejects this proof. From here too, there is no proof that it is a mitzvah to bury the dead, as Jeremiah cursed the wicked, saying that they would deviate from the general custom and not be buried. Due to all these difficulties, Rav Chama was unable to adduce incontrovertible proof that there is a mitzvah to bury the dead. A dilemma was raised before the sages. Is burial obligatory on account of disgrace? That is, so that the deceased should not suffer disgrace of being left exposed as his body begins to decompose, or is it on account of atonement? That is, so that the deceased will receive atonement by being returned to the ground from which he was formed. The Gemara answers, what is the practical difference that arises from knowing the reason that burial is necessary? The Gemara answers, there is a difference in a case where one said before he died, "I do not want them to bury that man," that is myself, right? He's talking about himself. But you say that burial is required on account of disgrace. It is not in his power to waive his own burial, as his family shares in the disgrace. But if you say that burial is required on account of atonement, didn't he effectively say, "I do not want atonement"? And with regard to himself, one should be able to do as he wishes. What then is the halacha? The Gemara suggests, come and hear a proof from the fact that the righteous patriarchs, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, were all buried. If you say that burial is required on account of atonement, do the righteous need atonement? Well, the Gemara rejects this proof. Yes, even the righteous are in need of atonement, as it is written, "For there is no righteous person on earth who does good and never sins." Ecclesiastes 7:20. And so even the righteous need atonement for the few sins that they committed over the course of their lifetimes. The Gemara suggests, Tashama, come and hear a proof from the verse referring to Abiyah, son of Jeroboam, and all Israel shall eulogize him and bury him, for he alone of Jeroboam shall come to the grave. 1 Kings 14:13. And if you say that burial is required so that the deceased should achieve atonement, these two, that is Jeroboam's other sons, should also be buried so that they should achieve atonement. The Gemara rejects this argument. This son, Abiyah, who was righteous, should achieve atonement through his death and burial, but these other sons who were wicked should not achieve atonement even in death. The Gemara suggests, come and hear a proof from the curse pronounced by Jeremiah upon the wicked. They shall not be eulogized, nor shall they be buried. Jeremiah 16, verse 4, which indicates that it is not on account of atonement that burial is required. As were the case, the wicked are certainly in need of atonement, and therefore they should be buried. The Gemara answers, there is no proof, as Jeremiah's intention might be that the wicked should not achieve atonement. Therefore, the question of whether burial is necessary in order to prevent disgrace or achieve atonement remains unresolved. So a dilemma was raised before the sages. Is the eulogy delivered for the honor of the living relatives of the deceased, or is it delivered for honor of the dead? The Gemara asks, what is the practical difference between the two possible reasons? The Gemara answers, there is a difference in a case where one said before he died, do not eulogize that man, meaning himself. If the eulogy is delivered to honor the deceased, he is able to forego his honor. But if it is delivered to honor the living, he is not, as it is not in the power of one individual to forego the honor of others. Alternatively, the difference is with regard to whether it is possible to collect the eulogist fee from the heirs. If the eulogy is to honor the dead, it is possible to collect this fee from the heirs, even against their will. But if it is to honor the living, they are able to forego this honor. The Gemara suggests, Tashama, come and hear a proof from the verse that states, and Abraham came to eulogize Sarah and weep over her. Genesis 23, verse 2, indicating that Sarah's burial was delayed until Abraham returned from Beersheba to Hebron to eulogize her. And if you say that a eulogy is delivered due to the honor of the living, would they have unduly delayed burying Sarah due to Abraham's honor? The Gemara rejects this argument. It was satisfactory to Sarah herself that her funeral was delayed so that Abraham could be honored by eulogizing her. Since Sarah herself would prefer that Abraham eulogized her, there was no disgrace in waiting for Abraham to arrive. The Gemara suggests, Tashama, come and hear, a different resolution of this dilemma from the verses referring to Abiah, the son of Jeroboam. And all Israel shall eulogize him and bury him. 1 Kings 14:13. And if you say that a eulogy is delivered due to the honor of the living, are these people, Jeroboam's surviving family, worthy of this honor? The Gemara answers, it is satisfactory to the righteous when other people are honored through them, since that is their wish. They are eulogized even if their wicked relatives are honored as a result. The Gemara suggests, come and hear, Tashama, a proof from the curse pronounced by Jeremiah upon the wicked. They shall not be eulogized, nor shall they be buried. Jeremiah 16, verse 4. So if you say that a eulogy is delivered due to the honor of the living, why should the wicked not be eulogized, as perhaps they are survived by the righteous people who are worthy of this honor? The Gemara answers, it is not satisfactory to the righteous when they are honored through the wicked, and therefore they prefer that a eulogy not be delivered for the wicked relatives. So the Gemara suggests, Tashama, come and hear, a resolution of this dilemma from what Jeremiah said to Zedekiah. You shall die in peace, and with the burnings of your fathers, the former kings that were before you, so shall they make a burning for you, and they will eulogize you, saying, Ah, Master. Jeremiah 34, verse 5. So if you say that a eulogy is delivered due to the honor of the living relatives of the deceased, what difference does it make to him if he is eulogized? The Gemara answers, it is possible that a eulogy is to honor the living, and this is what Jeremiah is saying to Zedekiah. Enjoy the thought that Israel shall be honored through you at your funeral, just as they were honored through your ancestors at their funerals.